"No, man, you're very wrong," said a woman across the aisle listening in. "That old woman dead ever since." The bus pulled up in front of a school and many of the children disembarked. Despite Edward's silence, the woman continued to question him once the bus was on its way again. "You just visit a body, sir? You just—" Edward spared her the need to repeat the question. "No, I'm Miss Hamblin's great-nephew, and I'm—" The woman drew back and stared at Edward. He smiled awkwardly. "Yes, I'm her great-nephew." "You know, I'm about to say that. You look too sweet." Edward felt his travel companion begin to rub her thigh against his. The woman seated just behind began to laugh and was soon joined by the ladies across the aisle. A voice from behind spoke, "Leave the gentleman alone. He going to think we all foolish." The woman beside him turned sharply around, almost knocking Edward to the floor. Some of her vegetables fell on his lap. "Why, you can't mind your own business," she said hard. "Ain't nobody talking to you that I hear." The entire bus broke out laughing. When the laughter died away, the woman sat quietly, chastened, Edward hoped. The young man left standing beside her when he sat down, leaned over from a seat across the aisle. He spoke to the woman with exaggerated sympathy. "Miss, yes, miss, I think the conductor give you 2 tickets when you get on." She looked very concerned and rummaged in her pocket. She pulled out a single ticket stub. "No, I only pay with one, just the one." After a moment the fellow proceeded toward the exit at the front of the bus, and as he stepped down to leave he shouted, "They should have charged you for 3. One for each half of your big-ass boxty and one for your big loud mouth." The woman exploded through an open window. She cursed the boy in words Edward did not understand. He took the opportunity to move away to an empty seat. That little vignette is really about just a meeting between Edward and local people. I can tell you even now that when I'm in Barbados, because I'm with my wife and her family, I'll often go to events where I'm the only white person. And there's always eccentrics in the crowd. And, you know, it makes for a very interesting evening. But Barbadian society, I think, is still generally 2 solitudes. And that's just an observation on my part. So Edward's immersion into this society is actually, to me, this novel, although it's set in Barbados, is as much a Canadian novel as it is a Barbadian novel, because it's set in the year 1969, which is about the time that immigration of West Indians was happening into Toronto. And what I wanted was to have a person like a protagonist like Edward as racially naive as possible, which is of course not possible in the world we live in, but back then it would be possible for a white Canadian in Toronto to maybe know one black person or none. And so I wanted to really take him down there and place him in that kind of a situation where he could be an observer of both sides of the racial divide. So in that sense, it's an expression of a Canadian notion of racial strife, or I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but yeah. And in the novel, there's points in there where he asks questions of both blacks and whites in Barbados and is surprised by answers he gets. I'll read one more piece for you. This is a scene where Edward's gone to Cheapside Market, and it's a place where Sissy Brathwaite sells her vegetables that she grows. This is how she makes a living. She has a small plot of land. And so he's heard about Cheapside Market from other people, so he's gone there. Cheapside Market seemed as busy as ever on this particular Saturday. At Sissy's suggestion, Edward began to explore the area. The entire market encompassed a rectangular area about 50 by 100 yards. Everything that could be made, grown, or caught by human hands was on display. The aromas of fresh dolphin and swordfish marinated for hours in pepper sauce, herbs, and other seasoning, mingled with the scent of ripe golden apples, shaddock, eddowes, and yams. Handmade leather sandals and belts adorned a nearby booth where a tourist slowly examined the owner's goods. A number of stalls displayed colorful jewelry, small beaded bracelets and necklaces. Around mid-morning, Edward looked back and saw Sissy filling an order for 3 ripe breadfruits. An older man with long dreadlocks was nearby, working away at a wood carving with a thin curved knife. A bird appeared to be growing out of a log of red mahogany. "You from the cruise ship?" No, I'm not." Edward was happy to be able to respond in a negative. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with being a tourist, but he wanted to preserve the distinction. The old man continued to carve the bird without responding. Edward could not resist. "Actually, I'm from Hamblin Hall." Gray-haired Rastafarian stopped carving and looked at Edward with a surprised expression. "Hamblin Hall? No, man. You know Hamblin Hall?" "Yes, I own Hamblin Hall Cottage. I came down with Sissy Brathwaite." Edward immediately wished he had not supplied so much information, but he felt the need to address the man's disbelief. "Wait, Sissy, my good friend, you live in Hamblin Hall Cottage?" Edward nodded. The man looked him up and down and finally smiled and shook his head. "You know, every day life is treat you like a child." After making this strange observation, the man returned to his carvings and fell silent. Edward stood beside him for some time before realizing the conversation had come to an end. It was nearing noon. A growing hunger made breakfast seem a distant memory. From a nearby booth, he bought a ham and cheese cutter. Edward stood to the side and watched all the activity, wondering at the market's ordered chaos. He consumed the sourdough bun sandwich before deciding to return to Sissy. Edward squeezed past one of the vendors until he saw her stalls in the distance. She was busy with a customer. As she placed some produce in her basket and took the money in exchange, he noticed Sissy glancing to her right. There at the end of the street he could see Mary Collimore and a young white child. Sissy seemed preoccupied with Mary and the girl. She sat erect and assumed a more formal posture. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and began fussing with her nearest stall, rearranging the remaining fruit before returning to her seat. Given the neatness of her house, he judged Sissy to be meticulous about cleanliness, but she seemed suddenly to have become even more fastidious. She wiped her hands on a piece of clean cloth. Edward paused as some tourists crossed his path. From where he stood, he could see that Sissy followed Mary's every step. Wearing an expensive dress of an elegance and style that only the wealthy could afford, Mary looked even more beautiful than he remembered. While the Collimore family expressed a certain sense of fashion, it was Mary who transcended all of them. Edward thought of them as very English, though they lived in Barbados for many generations. But Mary was different. It was in the way she moved. She had something of the island in her. As they walked toward the far side of the street, the child broke free and skipped along the sidewalk to Sissy's fruit stand. Edward, hidden by Vivi's stall, was unnoticed by either woman. When the child was within 10 feet of Sissy, Mary looked about and noticed her near Sissy's stall. Mary cried out, "Lillian, darling, come now, don't bother the lady." The child had seen the sugar cakes and ignored Mary. She came close to Sissy and held out her hand, smiling. Edward came closer. "You should listen to your auntie, dear," Sissy softly admonished. The young child looked sad and withdrew her hand. "Come now, Lillian, we must hurry," said Mary. They made her way closer to Sissy's stall. She acted as if the child might be in danger. Sissy reached out with a sugar cake. "Hurry now, darling, your auntie worried for you." The little girl ran up to Sissy, eagerly took the treat, at which point Mary charged in and slapped the child's hand, knocking the sugar cake to the ground in front of Sissy. "How dare you!" she shouted, glaring at Sissy. Sissy appeared stunned, unable to move her arm, with her hand still extended towards the child. "You dirty woman, who knows where your hands have been?" Mary grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her away. Edward stepped over to Sissy, searching for the right words. He could hear Mary loudly declare to the simpering child, "Lillian, don't ever take anything from these people." Sissy said nothing. Slowly rising, she retrieved the falling sugar cake and returned to her seat. Edward was stunned. Phoebe looked over and glared in Mary's general direction. "She want 2 lashes. They think they that much better than we. Sissy, pay she no mind." Phoebe stopped. Sissy begun to tremble. But when Phoebe reached over and placed her hand on Sissy's shoulder, Sissy stared at her with a look so fierce that Phoebe backed away. That's a scene in the marketplace. I can't reveal to you the actual relations between the characters, so I'd like you to buy the novel and read it.